Thank you for turning to page 121. Today we're going to take a look at Denuli. This is a planetary survey number 2 from Gurps Traveler. And this is part 2 of my safari ship video. Well, how is that safari ship? Well, this is the planet on which safari ship happens. The Shrieker world. This is pretty interesting because Gurps Traveler, of course, didn't follow the assassination of Strephon, and it diverged to a separate timeline. And this tells the story of what happened on the Safari world, on Denuli, after the events in Safari's ship. That's why I said in the opening of the part 1 of this is that it's kind of different, kind of official, kind of not, because this is part of the Lorenverse. Now, it can easily be ported into whatever Traveler game you're playing, and the events in this take place before the assassination. But even so, this is actually part of the Lorenverse. So there we have it. So I'm going to take a look at this guy in depth today on page 121. Gurps Traveler Planetary Survey number 2, Denuli, the Shrieker World. I realize this isn't really part 2 of the Safari ship adventure per se, but this did something neat, and I wanted to follow that up with this video, so it's 2-part in that regard. This is by Lauren Wiseman and Sean Haverneck from Steve Jackson Games in 2001. These planetary surveys were a pretty good idea. I really liked how they were done. So we get the map itself of Denuli and the planetary survey. What makes this connected to Travel Adventure number 10, Safari Ship, of course, is the planet, the Shrieker World. Not called Denuli in that. The planet is only referred to as 567-098. And it talks about an expedition to go there to trap an animal for some rich guy's enjoyment. And I'm going to touch on that a little bit, but that's why this is a follow-up. They actually took the planet itself, and then with the discovery of the trapper creature from the Safari ship adventure, they actually took some notoriety of the world and they named it Denuli. I'll get to where that name came from in a moment. This is home of a sophont species known as the Shriekers and the fabled Denuli gems. So it's kind of neat. They just took this world and they moved it forward roughly 10 years, which would put it in about 1120. Now remember, Gurps Traveler takes place in the Lorenverse, the alternate travel universe, where the assassination of Strephon by Dullinor never happened. And the story just continues on in Traveler's Golden Age. I was really excited about that when they started it in the late 90s, because we had kind of lost everything between Mega Traveler and the new era. The Traveler I knew and loved was gone. Well, this brought it back, Gurps did, and we were able to enjoy a lot of aspects of the Golden Age. And then, of course, Mongoose came back and you just said, the heck with it, it's only 1105. So we've been able to really enjoy the Golden Age and new products since then. So the IISS data for Denuli, it's a strange system. It's only got 3 actual planets that are worth worrying about, one of them being Denuli, the only inhabitable planet in the system. And it has a lot of debris floating about it, whether this is natural debris or caused by some of the stuff in the final war of grandfather versus his children and grandchildren, we don't know. But there's a lot of navigational hazards. And it's kind of fun because the idea that you would run into a rock as you come out of jump, the odds are billions to 1 that would happen even in a cluttered system. So, but it's still kind of fun. I liked what they did here. The authors go ahead and give us the nice history of the planet Denuli in its prehistory. It's very seismically and volcanically active planet, and that, of course, causes its inhabitants a lot of hardship. The first people were the sun people, literally worshippers of the sun, and these are the Shriekers. The Shriekers are giant spider-like creatures that rose to intelligence due to the pressures of their environment, and have established at one time had an empire called the first empire, the Empire of the Sun People. They got to about tech level 5 by Traveler terms. This is all written for Gurps, but it'd be about TL5. And they had pretty much taken over all the intelligent Shriekers on the planet, and they brought them under one roof. But then natural disasters happened and caused a great drought and wiped out the empire. And the only people that's really surviving, and many of the Denuli, many of the Shriekers that survived it, but the only society that survived it were the creatures that went to the Great Retreat, which was the uh, basically the last bastion of culture and technology left on the planet. They ended up in a valley that was largely untouched by the changing environment, and they were able to continue to thrive. And then we go to contact. How did they get contacted? The coming of Matume Denuli. Old records of the Shrieker's own rich oral tradition enable historians to date Denuli's arrival to 480. Denuli is the name of a scout who had to put down on the planet for some repairs. He was on planet for about 2 years, and during that time he apparently interacted with the Shriekers, learned to communicate with the Shriekers, and influenced their culture greatly and even their religion. So kind of neat. He also, for whatever reason, left uh, a scout beacon active on the planet just as a way to tag the planet as having been at least once visited by the scouts. Then in 1108, we get the Thingvellir expedition, which is, of course, the entire safari ship adventure in adventure number 10. I covered that in the previous video. And this talks about a gentleman who named Thingvellir who wants to capture a beautiful creature, which he would name Thingvellir's Crested Trapper. And then he would take it back, introduce to the scientific community, and get bragging rights, being able to name the creature for himself. And he wanted to do this to boost his social position so he could further himself in his retirement. He was going to sell his company, Staralon, to the mega corporation Narcirca, and he wanted to retire to Core, specifically Capital, and he felt that this creature would give him the chops to move out in Imperial High Society. The adventure doesn't tell us really anything of what happens to Mr. Thingvellir, other than the fact that he is successful, and we actually get to see the name of the creature called Thingvellir's Crested Trapper. That was pretty cool. Now, Circa funded his corporation or his expedition in part of their effort to buy Staralon LIC, which was his medical equipment company. And Nasirka wanted to branch into this branch of sales, but they didn't want to do a startup. It was cheaper to just buy an existing company, because then, of course, you not only get everything all ready to go with people in place, you eliminate a rival immediately because you've bought the rival. So the thing that made Thingvellir work so well with the Shriekers was he was able to help clear the pilgrimage route. The pilgrimage is something that the female Shriekers do in company with their husband. They mate for life, and they make an arduous trek, many, many kilometers, to a sacred valley called the Valley of Memories. And on this trek, the female develops enough hormones through the movement that she's able to produce an egg sac with 10 to 20 eggs in it. Everybody smiles. We're all happy. They go back home. The egg sac then stays with the female. Actually, the egg sac is then given to the male. And then the male, over the course of the next several years, as survival pressures ease and more members of the society are needed, i.e. children, the male goes ahead and he fertilizes the eggs, and roughly 50% of the eggs will hatch and become Shriekers. Shriekers are largely ignored by their parents until around the age of 8. Kind of like what the Hivers do with their younglings. They just ignore them, or in the Hivers' case, they even exterminate them to keep them from being a nuisance. And then once they're 8 years old, there's a good chance they will survive. Then they invest resources in training them. So Thingvellir helped clear the pilgrimage route for the females and the males to make this journey to the Valley of Memories. And we find out in the old Adventure 10 Safari ship, we find out that the Valley of Memories has the famed Denuli gems. These are unsuccessful eggs that were never fertilized and hatched. The various Denuli bring them back with them on their treks and scatter them about the valley, believing the unhatched spirits will inhabit the new eggs and then give the next generation of Denuli. So they are considered sacred. They're also organic. They're failed eggs. But people just see them as pretty, pretty gems, and they grab them, and they're worth a lot of money. So that's how the other story ends. So that brings us to the Denuli rush. Once the gems had been out there, Denuli himself brought a few gems with him. They were discovered after his death, so nobody could ask him where he got them from. Discovered among his effects. Well, there's a great clamor for these gems, but no one knew where they came from. Well, once it was found out that they came from the planet now named Denuli, there was a rush to grab as many of these unsuccessful eggs as possible. And that caused a lot of influx of other intelligent creatures, mostly human, to come to this area. Also, Nasirka, once having met the Shriekers, became very interested in working with the Shriekers to exploit whatever resources they could from the planet and from the aliens. So we get to Denuli today, and the Shrieker homeworld is located in 1031 of District 268 Spinward Marches. It was barely charted in the first, it was skipped over in the first survey, barely charted in the second. And the planet itself only has 2 major landforms. What I really enjoyed about this module is this was a follow-up to the world that we met in Safari Ship, but it really doesn't talk about Safari Ship much beyond the Thingvellir expedition and the previous page. It goes into what the planet is and what the planet's become roughly 10 years after that expedition. And that was kind of neat because when I read Safari Ship to prepare it for the video I made the other day, I was reading, I'm going, Denuli gems. That sounds really familiar. So I tore through my collection until I finally found this guy and went, I knew that word from somewhere, and realized that this is actually a sequel. This just tells us what's going on with the planet now. That was pretty cool. So we get the system highlights, which are the various planets. We've got Denuli, of course, which is the only habitable world. We get Uamdar, which is a small rock ball, an icy rock ball in the outer system. You can refuel at this rock ball by melting the ice, converting it into water, and then cracking the water for the hydrogen. And then we get Ilgud, which is the closest planet to the star, and honestly, it's just a rock ball floating in space. There's my receipt for when I bought this guy. I bought him on May 9th, 2001. Sold to me by Brian, who worked at 3D House of Games, and I paid $9.53 for it. I don't know why I save all the receipts, not all the receipts, but a lot of the receipts, but I do. So since the planet has become of interest to Nasirka and to people trying to get Denuli gems, the Imperium has taken notice of it. Specifically, they have planted a scout base there. So we have a scout base and a starport. Yes, there's actually a downport. It's grown to be about a Class D starport. There are only about 200 humans total on the planet at any one given time. About 6 of these are members of the scout base that's in orbit, and that makes landfalls here and there and tries to interdict some of the smuggling of the Denuli gems off planet. They take readings off transponders of ships that are stealing the Denuli gems and report them to authorities, and when those ships make a port of call, they are flagged and get a very vigorous customs check. So I thought that was pretty neat. And then as we're entering the system, we talk about the planetoids I had mentioned, the debris floating, and how they can make navigation somewhat hazardous here. And then we get the landforms of the planet Denuli, which is the Great Desert, the Lost Sea, and the mountains. And then we get the Valley of Memories, which is the pocket of civilization that's left. And scattered among the valley are the ruins of the Sun Empire, which is kind of interesting. You get to, there's some old ruins here, but there's not anything of peculiar interest. There's no working relics or anything. And then, of course, the last part is the Great Ocean. They have one massive body of water. And then we get a look at some native life. I enjoyed this. This was something that I hadn't really given much thought beyond the Shriekers and the Trapper that they were there for. We get the native life. We get pellet voles. These things are kind of neat. That's a pellet vole right there, that little dude. And they, when they find food, they eat up as much as they can. They can eat their entire body weight in just a few minutes. And they store it in sacks along their sides of their hide. And then they go back to their lair, they regurgitate it, and make it into little pellets. These pellets can be considered something of a delicacy to the Shriekers. So a lot of Shrieker cuisine involves pellet voles, which is really just vomit. Songbats, that's these guys up here. Everything on the planet pretty much has 8 legs. These resemble Terran bats only superficially. They have hollow points in their head, and when they fly, they make sounds. That gave them the name songbats. A flock of songbirds rising into the air has been described as a poorly tuned orchestra, heavy in the woodwinds, warming up for a concert. So I thought that was pretty neat. We get this is another old receipt from a different product from Games Plus from 1995. We get spider slugs, which are just big old spider slugs, just encounters. And then we get a look at Thingveller's Crested Trapper. And I was really excited about that because there's not a very good depiction of that in the original Adventure, in Adventure 10 Safari Ship. There's no picture of the trapper, really, not a good one. But we got to look here. It has wings, but it cannot fly. It uses the wings to intimidate anyone that would try to harm it or to attract prey. And then we get this good chapter on the Shriekers. We get their physiology, their reproduction, which I've already gone into a little bit. Aging and death. Shriekers only live to be about 40 Terran years old. At that point, they go into basically a form of coma. A very small percentage of this population that goes into this coma, something like less than 5%, survive it, and they come out and they become elders. Elders are no longer fertile, but they carry a lot of the wisdom of the tribe. So elders are very important to it. And then the Shrieker's philosophy basically is if you can't use it, throw it away. They're very practical. They only use resources where they need to. We're going to take a little sidebar here and look at the eggs, the gems actually. Shrieker eggs are unfaceted crystalline structures of indescribable beauty and superficially resembling Terran pearls, but much darker in color. It has a semi-translucent quality that gives the impression of shifting colors that flow deep within. They're considered very beautiful. However, a lot of people who have been collecting Denuli gems were repulsed when they found out they were actually infertile eggs, that they were actually had at one time been living matter. So a lot of people just voluntarily gave up the Denuli gems as a collectible. Other people were forced to because the Imperium outlawed them because so much damage was being done to the Shriekers' reproduction in unscrupulous people just grabbing any Denuli eggs they could, or Denuli gems they could find, whether they were viable eggs or not viable eggs. So here we get the Shrieker Society. You get the Great Retreat, which is a civilized valley, and then the Barbarian Nomads. The Barbarian Nomads are dealt with a little bit in this, and Narcirka is trying to exploit both groups for their own purposes. We get a look at the caste system that the Shriekers live by. They have serfs, which are just the workers, fighters, which are fighters, seekers, which are seekers after knowledge. These would be their Shrieker scientists, engineers, doctors, and craftsmen, and then their priests. Their priesthood is really just kind of everything we can do to get by. It's not as formal as it had been. It's more focused on day-to-day living and maybe expanding the race. And then we get the elders, which I already talked about, the marriage pilgrimage, which I talked about already. Language and names. Shriekers, a lot of what they communicate is hypersonic or through pads on their hands through vibration. The Narcirka is interested in that because it's a way to give communication without sound. The technology, really the best technology they have are walker legs. The Shriekers have very naturally short legs that limit their movement. They've figured out a way to attach prosthetic limbs, which with practice act almost like stilts but allow greater movement and mobility around the area, and as you can see, a weapon. And then we get the extrastellar relations, the official Imperial presence, which I've already discussed a little bit. The unofficial Imperial presence, of course, are people smuggling Denuli gems or otherwise trading with the locals. Narcirka funded the Thingvellir expedition and discovered Shrieker sentience, and it's taken a very proprietary attitude of the Shriekers and their planet. While the short-term value of Denuli gems is considerable, Narcirka realized that with a regular source, the prices would drop. The interest that Narcirka has for R&D, research and development, is the native race's nerve pads. Direct person-to-person communication without the poorly understood psionics is worthy of investigation. So you could actually touch somebody and communicate your thoughts and intentions. And that's what they want to develop. They found out that these nerve pads can interact with computers to create an interface. Now we get a nice look at a little crime group called the Denuli Ring. These guys started out as being Denuli gem sufferers or smugglers, and have gone on to become this rather large crime group. The Denuli Gem Appreciation Society are basically collectors of the gems, which are illegal in Imperial space and Sword World space, but not in independent space. So it's illegal in a lot of places to own a Denuli gem. And we get the traders and regulars. We get smugglers on the planet getting the Denuli gems. And then we get the naval crackdown, as I talked about. And then a couple of private groups that decided they wanted to crack down on the gems themselves. So they fund ships or mercenary groups to go in and interdict the smugglers. That was kind of neat. I like both of those. Then we get a nice look at some characters. Again, this is based on Gurps. Most of this book is rules agnostic. When we get the characters, of course, they are based on the Gurps system. I haven't played the Gurps system in well over 20 years, so I don't really remember a ton about it itself. I have all the books. I could reread it. I know that it approximated, a lot of Gurps approximated to existing Traveler, and it was a pretty good fit, but you had to make a few modifiers for tech level and things like that. So we get some humans that are on there, the IISS Contact Specialist, and then we get Movers and Shakers, which is Adolpha Carilla. Adolpha Carilla is the District 268 Subsector Division Head of Organic Research and Development for Nasirka. Sorry, I couldn't remember her right off the top of my head. Frederick Eduardo, Fred Ed Ted, as he's known. This guy's interesting. He's basically an outcast noble who is going around in an Empress Morava starship that was given to him that he has converted to the company store. And it's pretty neat. I kind of like this guy, and he may be making an appearance somewhere in my game. I had forgotten about this guy. And then Hayasser the Lesser, just an interesting character. And then we get adventures on Denuli. We get different things, the adventure seeds. They're very brief. We get scouts, industrial espionage, cracking down. Denuli comes to you. And then we get alternate Denulis. You can place it pretty much wherever you want. Reparations, a little gift. And then an index. A nice look at Worlds Within Jump 6 of Denuli. A nice look at the map. And then a nice ad for Traveler's Aid Society from Gurps. And we're out. There you go. That's a look at the kind of not official but official sequel to Safari Ship Adventure number 10. This guy's available through Far Future Enterprises on the Gurps discs or thumb drives. I'll attach a link below for this particular guy that you can get through Far Future Enterprises. That's Mark Miller's company. But I just thought this was kind of neat. When I started rereading Safari Ship and I saw Denuli, I knew I'd seen that word somewhere else, so I tore into my collection, found this guy, and went, yes. And then I found, basically, it's an actual sequel. So there you have it, kind of a long-winded one. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for staying with me. Please leave your comments. I want to appreciate your time, or tell you I appreciate your time. And that's it. I'll see you next time on page 121.